Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world.
Lovely. It is great to properly meet you, Greg. My name is Sam. I am Scottish, a 90s baby, and I reckon I sort of strayed off the fairly standard path in my second year of university when I decided to defer a year to start a business. And haven't ever really looked back on that decision since. Well, I've looked back with happiness. I started my first startup company when I was age 20 and got really stuck involved with the ecosystem, lots of different startup communities, had some great experiences running that company, learned a lot, but didn't make any money from it, wasn't financially successful. I then did a stint of consulting, and back in 2016, I started another company. This one I really got my teeth stuck into. I ran it for 5 years before we got a good acquisition offer from a hedge fund. Sold that business, stayed for an earnout, and became a free agent in 2023. Spent a lot of time traveling, which is a bug that I'm sure we'll discuss in more detail. I say a bug, it's really a pleasure and a real luxury. And last summer, I then started a new company, registered the business OpenFi Limited, and began fundraising for it in September last year, hired a team in February this year, and now back fully focused on running another startup company.
Awesome, man. Thanks for the intro, and thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It's no small commitment to come on my show, and so I'm constantly grateful for anyone who can take the time to join me. It's awesome, and I'm still bewildered as to why people do.
Well, you had me sold when you told me it was free therapy. I thought, great.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, free. You will get an invoice later, but we'll. But really, I genuinely do appreciate it, man. So yeah, tell me about the I've got a lot of questions for you, as I'm sure you can imagine. You said about you've had a number of different ventures throughout the years, and the two most recent ones, one that resulted in an exit earnout, and then your current venture, OpenFi. Let's start with just briefly, just explain to me what OpenFi is again. I know we have chatted about it before, but if you could just refresh my memory, what's OpenFi all about? And also for the people listening and watching.
Yeah, sure. Essentially, we are using AI to automate the SDR role, which is the sales development representative role. It's like the junior salesperson, and they're responsible for booking meetings into the sales team's diary. So two aspects to that. One aspect is taking inbound web traffic, pre-qualifying it, nurturing it, and then booking it in. And then the other is actually going out potentially through a customer's old database and reaching out to old leads, or sourcing new leads online, chasing them up, and getting those appointments booked in.
Very interesting. Not least because probably by the time this episode comes out, well, maybe a bit later actually, but my startup should be out of stealth, and it very much relates to what you're doing.
Cool.
So we may need to talk about that. But no, that's super interesting, and especially I don't know if you know much about me, if you've taken the time to look, but I sort of built a career around sales and marketing leadership, so I find it infinitely interesting. What was the catalyst for wanting to go that route specifically on this new venture?
In my last company, we did a lot of lead management for estate agents. So we worked with, Knight Frank, Winkworth, Savills, also the big PLCs that people don't really know the brands of, Connells Countrywide PLC, LSL PLC. And a large part of what we were doing was automating lead pre-qualification. And we were doing it with questionnaires, text messages, like quite old-fashioned technologies. Whereas what we're working on now is full LLM agents on WhatsApp who can have really rich, engaging conversations. And it's not just a old-fashioned chatbot like multi-choice answer. It just feels like talking to a human. If anything, better than a human, because in all of these businesses that we worked with, capacity is so limited. Many of them get we dealt with millions of leads per year, and there's just not capacity to follow up with everyone and chase everyone. Whereas with AI, capacity is unlimited. I mean, yes, there is a cost, but it's so marginal compared to human time. And I think the other really amazing thing for big brands is the consistency. Like, there's a huge cost to training people, and sometimes the training cost is trying to get humans to do things consistently, like put data into the CRM. Like, just put the data into the CRM after the call. Put the data.
I know
the
that
CRM.
all too well. Yeah. It's a constant battle. Yeah,
Or
I've built
please
many
follow up.
CRM like Bibles and playbooks to be like, if it's not in the CRM, it didn't happen, and like all these constant meetings.
With
Yeah,
AI, like, it's all done. It's all automated. It's in the
right.
CRM. I think the biggest area that pushed me to get into this business was where money is left on the table. And with your sales background, you'll know this. It's about follow up. It's very demotivating for humans to be rejected. We hate it. Even sales professionals hate it. And to really close deals, you need to follow up and follow up and follow up and follow up. And we just get bored. Our minds wander off onto different things. We have inbounds, which are exciting. We like the first part of the process, not the last part of the process. Whereas AI, it just is a computer program. It will follow up relentlessly in a human, nice, warm way, but it'll never stop following up. And that is the real differentiator.
So OpenFi currently is using WhatsApp to accomplish this, right?
So WhatsApp at the moment, but it is pretty important for it to be omni-channel. So email, WhatsApp, SMS, a website live chat, well, AI-powered live chat. It's just about making it super easy for the customer to buy.
Yeah, and is it predominantly just to handle inbound inquiries at the moment? So anything that's kind of captured through like a lead magnet.
Phase one is inbound. Yeah. The offer to companies is really straightforward. It is do a 1 month free trial, A/B test it, and look at your uplift, and then you're going to want to keep using it, because what we're offering is making it really easy for your customers to come in and ask questions and engage with you. One of the things that I do love about WhatsApp is, as a consumer, now if I go on a website, I'm hunting around for a contact us section. They don't even have an email. They have a contact form with a CAPTCHA. I get the CAPTCHA wrong. I'm like, how am I getting the CAPTCHA wrong? I want to find some pricing information. It's not there. It's hidden. Whereas with a WhatsApp button, you click it. You don't have to give your name. You don't have to give your email. You don't have to give your phone number. It just throws you into the conversation, and you can immediately start asking the questions you want to ask without having to search or spend time. So the customer experience is just an order of magnitude better, and that reflects on the conversion rates.
It's super interesting because, like, there's so many people that seem to get that customer experience sort of hypothesis wrong, right? Which is, as myself, even as a CEO, it's someone who a lot of people, as you will know, will want to try and sell to. Like, we're like the two, we are the people that we're constantly bombarded with sales. If we're looking for a tool, like you say, you want something very low friction. I personally really like help chats. Like, if I have a question about something, if it's not on the website, I'm going to click that help chat button. And if it starts saying, I want your name, your mother's maiden name, your national insurance number, and all this sort of stuff, I'm just like, no, I'm not going to bother. I'll just look at the alternative. Like, that's how quick it has to be, because I haven't got limited time. So, and then if I'm in the help chat, and if it is easy to get in the help chat, and I ask a question and it says we typically reply in 2 days, I'm like, you know what I mean? Again, I'm moving on. Like,
the other thing that's neat about WhatsApp is it persists. So, you're on a bus on the tube and you're on a live chat and it drops off.
Right.
There's none of
this. Yeah, there's none of this with follow up via email kind of thing, which quite often happens, and it goes into your spam. And
whereas on WhatsApp, if you get interrupted in your conversation, no problem. It's there waiting for you to pick back up whenever you want. It's not lost. It's I think we're only just at the start of seeing the power of WhatsApp in business. And we did a lot of research in other countries, particularly Latin America. Their WhatsApp usage is like off the chart. They have entire e-commerce stores inside of WhatsApp, and we're just starting to get there. It's going to be huge.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. It's super interesting. I remember when there was a couple of startups I've worked for, leading teams, sales teams internationally, and when it came to certain countries, it was really interesting to see that the most powerful form of communication with prospective customers or existing customers was WhatsApp or similar sort of things, depending on the country. It's super interesting.
I do
Whereas
it now.
in the UK,
For the last few years, like pretty much all of the big deals that I've closed, at some point it's involved me during the process of it selling into a large company. I've got the contact details of the CMO, the CEO. And then when it comes to really, that painful hurdle of just trying to get the thing signed, it's jump on WhatsApp, call them. They don't pick up, send them a voice note on WhatsApp, make it super easy, write it on WhatsApp. And I've used WhatsApp to close the biggest contracts I've ever done, actually. I've chased people through WhatsApp. It's just so personal.
It makes sense because
email.
Yeah, it makes sense because sometimes, it's just that there's so much granular, there's so much detail sometimes to a nuance to a negotiation, or so many stakeholders to get involved. It's email is just clunky for that. It's just, it gets to a point, there are days between replies and it can get lost in the shuffle. And sometimes you just need to, just have a quick back and forth to get it done, right? So it makes sense. Absolutely. It's super interesting. And I will get back to that in a moment because it's, I have a lot of questions about sort of where you see that going and so on. But just to kind of take a step back then. So, you mentioned is it Eden? Is that how you pronounce it? Eden Property?
Eden Property, yes.
Am I saying that correct? Yeah. That was your previous business. So tell us a bit about that. Obviously, it was in property to some extent. So what was that all about?
I skipped out on the backstory. So I have actually been involved in if you deal me on Companies House, you'll see a couple of different directorships.
Right.
One company was Accendo Design, which we rebranded to Advance to Go, and that was property advertising software for landlords. That's the company I started when I was 20.
Right.
We got backing from Richard Branson. We won a bunch of pitch competitions. We got grant money. We put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but ultimately there was not product market fit. Landlords are very hard to acquire. Customer acquisition cost is high. Most of them use agencies to do the property find for them. Those that don't, there's actually a very small number. So when it came to our offering, we were really targeting a very small market. And this is 14 years ago where, the first iPhones were just coming out. It's a world different of technology literacy. And the target market we were targeting are in their 50s and 60s. It was very badly spec'd out business. We didn't do the market analysis first. I was working in property, so I was like, this is a problem, we can solve it. And we solved it very nicely. There weren't enough customers to make it profitable. Eden Limited was founded a couple of years after. So I was very fortunate to get into property as a landlord at the age of 22. I bought my first property super cheaply, renovated it, was working in consulting at the time, using my consulting income to pay for the renovation, doing parts of the renovation myself. But then I have continued to invest in property and buy-to-let property. And as the tax changes came about, I moved everything into a limited company as I started to sort of scale and professionalize that. So Eden's very much still a running business.
Okay, excellent. And so which was the business that you, and was Eden the one that you exited out of and then
no, Eden I still run. It's like
you still run
it's 100% owned by me, no other shareholders, no investors. It's my retirement business with all my properties in it, a big chunk of my net worth, just wrapped up in a special purpose vehicle. The company I sold the brand name was Lead Pro, and the limited business name was Property Technology Limited. So that was technically, actually, it was the fourth company I was a director of, but it was the second software company because I was involved in a building company before as well.
How did you get into tech then? What was the jump there? Was it always something that interested you? Or
I think it was exciting time back in, 2008, 2009 in the noughties. We had really the explosion of social media. Bebo was a huge thing. I was on Bebo before Facebook. Facebook came along, and I was at university studying chemistry, and I was sitting looking at all of these exciting rockstar journeys of new technology businesses like Airbnb. Loved was one of the first users of Airbnb, loved the concept. I loved couch surfing as well. And it was like the internet was established, everyone had connections, and we were really starting to see the new wave of technology businesses. And I was studying chemistry, and I was like, I don't want to teach chemistry to high school students. I don't want to become a researcher in a lab. Like, I want to be involved in building like really cool, scalable technology products. And one of the great things about going to university was there was an excellent entrepreneurship club with really good speakers. They ran accelerators, and I think that helped me understand how to start the journey of forming a limited business, seeing that it was possible to do, seeing people of my own age who were running successful tech businesses and making that jump.
So you were studying chemistry, but you sort of started taking part in these extracurricular activities there, learning about this world, and that kind of just sort of pulled you across.
Spot on. And my co-founder of that business was an informatics student studying actually AI. He was early in the AI journey.
Right.
So it was also a great place for like meeting talent, starting a team. It's the reason why so many tech businesses come out of university dropouts, because there's a great supportive ecosystem, and you've got like smart, hardworking, motivated people who just go, actually, I don't need 3 years of formal study. I've got this cracking idea and nothing's stopping me from just getting on with it.
It's interesting because you're about the third person in a row that has a similar story to that, where university, it was kind of no real ambition to be an entrepreneur, to get into the world of tech or anything like that. It was, no, I'm going to do this degree and I'm really fully focused on that. But then some sort of extracurricular event or you know, whatever speaking event or something like that occurred. And then it pulls them into this world, and then they're just, you know, lost, lost to the world of entrepreneurship. Yeah, it's super interesting, and you know, well done to the universities for putting on these kinds of things to make this, you know, clear as an additional avenue, really, that clearly a lot of people may not think of until they come across it. That's pretty awesome. Did you complete the degree then, or did you just go, do you know what, screw this, I'm just going to go into my business?
I did not complete the degree, but what I did do in the preceding years was I took my credits from 2 years of study and I moved them over to the Open University, and I got a degree from the Open University. I moved from chemistry to history and Spanish, which I much more enjoyed, bizarrely.
Awesome. Yeah. I did the Open University. I've done it a couple of times. I did it for sociology and business management.
I'm a huge fan. I thought it was fantastic. Yeah, really good.
They're amazing. My wife's currently doing her psychology degree with it. She's on her last year now, because obviously it's part-time, so it's like 6 years, you know. But yeah, they're incredible. You know, I really can't speak highly enough of them. And for those listening abroad who maybe aren't too familiar with, I know they are international, but you know, they're kind of more well known, I think, in the UK. That, you know, definitely look at that. They're amazing as an online, educational university program. When just their staff are fantastic, their resources, everything.
When I went to the graduation ceremony, I got pretty humbled. So I went being very proud of myself, and they were asking everyone that was graduating a bunch of different questions. So one of the questions was like, you know, raise your hand if you were working full time during part of your studies. And I was like, God, you know, I was working so hard. I was studying on the train when I was commuting in London. Like, I really crushed it in. I crammed it in there. And then afterwards, they asked a question that was so humbling. They said, you know, and raise your hand if you were caring for a family member while studying. And I thought, God, you know, like, working is hard, but imagine fitting in that study while caring full time for an elderly relative or children or like a disabled family member. Whoa, really hats off to the people that do it, especially those that are working and caring, because there's a subset of those as well. I'm like, those people are amazing.
They really are. They're superheroes. And there's a few people that I met on my course when we had those sort of rare get-togethers where they got kids or caring for people elderly, but also not only working, but working multiple jobs. You know, like, you know, doing 2 full-time jobs, you know, one for the day, one in the evenings or in the weekends or something like that, working a night shift, you know, and kids, and then just cramming the study in whenever they can. And it's like, fair play. You know, my wife impresses me. She obviously she's got children. We've got 1.5-year-old, and we went through all kinds of crazy IVF. He had a heart problem. He had to have heart surgery, all while working. Well, obviously not while during the birth, but
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
still back to work now, and she's still doing this degree. And every time she does it, I'm pretty sure I've fucked up the last paper I've done or whatever, and she manages to smash it, knock it out of the park. And I'm like, see, you got nothing to worry about. But it's majorly impressive. I couldn't do that. I struggled enough with like you said, with work and doing it. So,
kudos to her, and
yeah,
I'm glad you're
and all those others out there, doing that as well. It's just keep going. It's massively impressive, and I think ultimately worth it. But it's interesting you mentioned history. Sorry, just a random tangent, but you'll notice that this is pretty much what the entire show's about. You mentioned history. It's interesting because in the last few years, I've started to. Well, I think it's just getting older. I've taken much bigger interest in history and reading a lot more about it and watching a lot more about various parts of the world's history. And I've contemplated maybe doing something online to sort of delve a bit deeper there. I just kind of got this sentimentality, this deep yearning for wanting to in order to understand what is happening now more, to be a bit more reflective on what has been, if that makes sense.
It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it.
Good. And how's your Spanish?
Necesito practicar un poco.
Well, that's better than mine. So that's fair. That's good. So tell me more about the acquisition. I think that's super interesting. I've had a few people on now that have gone through that process, and I know that there may be certain things you have to be so semi-diplomatic about in terms of talking about that, but as is always the case. But it'd be interesting to know about that experience. Talk me through that. How did that come about, first of all, and then how did you find that experience overall?
So overall, it was awesome. It was like painful, but awesome, kind of like running a marathon. I'm delighted that we were able to sell the business. Having run a business and shut it down and have it just not really amount to anything, getting the alternate version where you create something that is adding so much value to the world that a third party is willing to pay you millions of pounds to own it, and it keeps running and it keeps growing and it keeps scaling without you. It is very cool. I am envious of many entrepreneurs because a lot of people have the really lucky joy of working in an industry that is also their passion. And I do think for very successful entrepreneurs, if you can have that, it's great because it keeps you motivated. With working in Property Technology Limited and with estate agents, I was never really passionate about helping estate agents make more money. I didn't wake up and go, I want to help people in suits and ties sell more houses. It's got me fired up for the day. I did enjoy, or do enjoy in business, the creative process of understanding a problem, building a solution to the problem, it being so good that people pay you for it, and then being able to scale that and build a team around it. I do wish I had been able to do it in an industry where I also loved the industry and really enjoyed working in the industry. But for me, when I started the company, it was always about making money. It was about running a business. It was about scaling a business. It was about building something that could work while I was fast asleep and was going to help me get towards financial freedom. So the exit was always in mind as part of the journey. I did want the optionality of just running a cash cow business where I could have it as a very good lifestyle business. I definitely learned before COVID, we were profitable and we were bootstrapped. We'd taken some angel funding, but nothing sophisticated, no VC money in there. And we'd got the business to profitability, which is freaking awesome because you can kind of sleep well at night knowing that you can pay the staff indefinitely and you don't have a runway anymore. COVID came and all estate agents were closed, and they just stopped paying their bills on whatever they could stop paying their bills on, which makes, total sense. It's what everyone did. But it made me really realize that when you own a business and it's generating you an income, there is a lot of risk associated with that. Whereas when you sell a business and you put that capital into real estate stocks, there's a lot more security in there. Like, you can have a cash flow being generated from your wealth that if a new competitor launches, or if a service breaks and you have a huge problem, you're pretty shielded. So almost going bust during lockdown definitely made me more proactive about wanting to exit the business as opposed to just run a cash cow business. We were approached by a competitor that wanted to buy us, and we were also approached by one of our customers who was a distributor who also wanted to buy us. And essentially, we kind of played them off against each other a little bit. And I think that's super important if you want to get a good price. There are far more experienced entrepreneurs than me who are experts at selling businesses. But what little I have learned is a large part is the growth story. So it's like, we have this business that creates this value. You have this massive network of customers. If you take the value we're creating with our customers and you deliver that to your customers, oh my God, look how much money you're going to make. Or you have a competitor who does what we do, and if you buy us in, you have a competitive advantage. Or there's a strategy to what we're doing that will unlock a different market for you or get data for you. Or we have a distribution license that is super valuable, but on a small scale. And at your scale, that distribution license becomes 10 times more valuable, 20 times more valuable. And definitely with the company that ended up buying us, who were one of our distributors, they already knew how much money they were making from selling our software, and they wanted to own it and scale it. So it made sense for them. And because they were owned by a hedge fund, they were also doing a roll-up where they were buying multiple software businesses to package them all together, to have a bigger revenue, to have economies of scale, synergies, to then be able to go and sell that private company either to another larger company or to list it on the stock exchange. So it ticked we ticked a lot of boxes for them. They ticked a lot of boxes for us. And although there were a lot of problems with the earnout, I sadly left on bad terms with the new buyer, I'm still overall very happy with the deal. I think it's really cool to know that technology, which I took from 0 to 1, is out there being used by a ton of people.
Yeah, it must have been one hell of a journey. And it was 7 years in total, your time with that business, is that right? From kind of launch
a tiny bit under, just under 7 years. The
Right.
original sale was after 5 years, and then there
Right.
was an earnout. And the earnout was actually contracted for a year, but I stayed a little bit longer. I would say, however, I think on average, businesses take 7 to 12 years to sell. I'd say that there were 2 reasons why we sold faster. Our first business, which we ran for 3 years, was in the same industry. It was in real estate technology, and we were selling it to landlords. The second business was selling it to estate agents. So we already had market connections and knowledge. The other big factor, which a lot of entrepreneurs talk about, is luck. So a lot of business is driven by macroeconomics, and interest rates were super low. We were at the top of an economic cycle. A lot of companies had very cheap or free money, and they could use it to buy businesses to grow and expand. So we were able to sell at a very good time as well. Like, the timing for a sale was great.
Yeah. And you mentioned that so they approached you, these potential buyers, or were you putting some signals out there? Were you maybe sort of flirting? Because you mentioned that this was something that you were very much top of mind. So.
We never instructed an investment banker, and we never ran a process to go out and seek buyers, which perhaps we should have done to create a larger market. It was definitely inbound, but when the signals were there, then I kind of jumped on the opportunity to manage it and get it over the line.
You weren't playing coy about it, kind of thing. It was yeah.
There's definitely it's sales, so you have to have a strategy, and we were at a really exciting point where the business was post-COVID. The real estate market was huge. Estate agents were making record-breaking revenues. which meant they were spending a lot on technology. So our sales were really good. So it was also an exciting time where we were growing a lot, and I would have been happy to keep running the business. One of the decision criteria for me to push on selling it was I realized that if I didn't sell the business now, it would probably be another 5 years before I could sell it again. Like the market conditions were going to change, and we were relatively small. So to get to like the next stage of sale, it was going to be a long time. And I was keen to take the lessons out. I was keen to have some time off. I was more keen to de-risk and get the financial freedom and cash in the chips.
Fair enough. And you mentioned that things kind of turned a bit sour towards the end. Is there anything you can speak on about that, or would that not be appropriate? Any factors that contributed to that?
You are so lucky, Greg, because I ended up going to court, and all of these legal documents that are NDA'd up to the hilt and you're never allowed to talk about, they all are now in the public domain because they were discussed in court and they're all in the court papers. So I can talk about pretty much all of it. The problem with the earnout was that there were two problems. Contractually, I had two separate relationships to the acquirer. So one was I was an employee, I had an employment contract, and the second was I was a shareholder, I had a share purchase agreement. And not too unsurprisingly, they both went wrong at the same time. So with the share purchase agreement, there was an earnout, and we got paid more money based on our revenue performance. And essentially, kind of like if you've ever had to claim something on insurance, the insurance company gets their loss assessor or adjuster, I always get them confused, to try and bring down the claim as much as possible to pay you as little as possible. It ended up being the same in the earnout, where the buyer tried to find any single reason possible not to pay us and to delay paying us. And they did it all completely legally. So basically, they could have run the calculation with us, which we'd done every month, and said, this is the amount, which we'd done every month, agree it within a week and pay us a week later. We could have had it done in 2 weeks. However, what the contract said was that they could wait 30 days before doing the calculation. So they waited 30 days, and then they gave us a calculation, which was a third of what we had previously agreed. So they really tried to anchor super low. So we then had a dispute process, which was contractually another month. And obviously, we didn't agree. We then had a month to choose an expert determinator to run the dispute resolution process and basically come up with an answer and review the accounts. They never even suggested one. They literally just let the timer run out. And then at that milestone, when that timer had run out, we had to pay the Chartered Institute of Accountants from England and Wales to go and find us an accountant expert determinator to manage the dispute. That then took 2 months for them to find someone, and it then took 2 months for that person to do the work. So the other side was just happy to let it run on as long as possible. The spoilers were, when the expert accountant reviewed everything, they ended up forcing the other side to pay us twice what they'd originally offered. I still think that we were shortchanged and that we should have got more. Of course I would. And I have a whole bunch of things I would do differently in the earnout in future. But in parallel to this process of running down the clock and just letting the contract take its course and not trying to resolve it and just being happy for the bills to rack up, they also, on the last day where we could negotiate the earnout before it had to be settled by a third party, they told me I was getting fired. And they said, yeah, your employment is going to get terminated, which was a total curveball for me, because in that year, we had performed incredibly. We'd grown 4 times. We'd 4x revenue in 12 months. And I was like, I am the golden boy. I'm making these guys so much money. So for them to turn around and be like, yeah, actually, we don't need you anymore. I was like, you guys are crazy. We then tried to arrange a settlement agreement, which I was happy to sign. They then, after months of negotiations and me spending a lot of money on lawyers, came back and added a clause. Literally on the day we were meant to sign, they added a clause which said, oh yeah, we'll settle your employment contract, and we'll do this settlement agreement and we'll pay you some money, but you can never sue us for anything ever. Meanwhile, the main dispute for the main earnout as the shareholder was still ongoing. So I was like, guys, I like, nice try, but how about no? So I was like, look,
Yeah,
just
that was a little too brazen.
yeah. I was
Yeah.
like, just let's solve this one, and the other one will get solved when it gets solved. But let's just do the original contract. Like, take out this clause that you've added in last minute. We've all negotiated it for months. Let's just get it signed. And they were like, we're not going to. And I was like, okay, you've got until Friday. And if you don't do it, on Monday, I'm going to start the court proceedings to go to employment tribunal. Because there's also a timeline on that where if you leave it too long, you run out of time to go to employment tribunal. So I took them to employment tribunal and I won, and they had to pay me. And that took another year and a half and was a huge distraction from the new business. But at the same time, I was like, you just have to stick up for yourself in life. And I got paid on both the disputes. I got paid as the employee and I got paid as the shareholder. And it was so disappointing. What blows my mind, particularly with the employment tribunal, is they ended up paying me the same amount of money that they would have settled on the settlement agreement. But we were in court for 1 week. The entire senior management team of the business, which turns over millions and millions of pounds, were in court for a whole week. They also hired a barrister and a second law firm who did 2 weeks plus of preparation and a week in court. They must have spent the best part of £200,000 fighting this court case, which they lost, which I was happy to settle and move on with my life and their life, and they had to pay it anyway. So I was like, I don't know. I'm glad I stuck up for myself. And I wonder if they were like, oh, we were unreasonable, or if it's just that in bigger businesses, I suspect that in larger companies, playing around with law is just part of the playbook. It's just part of the bullying playbook of if you're a hedge fund and you buy 10 businesses a year and you try and, nickel and dime and cut down the agreed price by 20%. On 9 of the businesses, they don't fight you, so you save millions of pounds, and it's just part of business as normal.
Right, I was going to say
that's what it is.
It's a calculated gamble, and yeah, like you said, it probably costs them an enormous amount of money. But for all of the others that they do that to, where no people just lay down and take it, it probably works out, in the end that they come out on top.
Probably, sadly, probably. Yeah. I mean, it definitely made me question, because being a startup entrepreneur, I'm quite pro-capitalism and I'm fairly right-wing. Like, I believe in get up, go educate yourself, put yourself through university, work hard. But it did make me realize that there are pools of wealth which can be used very unethically. And ultimately, I'm very pro-legal system. Both times it came out in my favor and I'm happy with the outcomes. But I think there's lots of horror stories of it going terribly wrong and people with more money bullying and
yeah, for sure. And unfortunately the good guys don't always win, but it sounds to me like I think in this case the right outcome, well, from based on what you've told me, but the right outcome came about, but it's not always the case, is it? And I think it's also about how much energy the individual has in order to fight it. I've been through legal proceedings, and quite often it's really just down to having the tenacity, the patience, the energy, and the fortitude to just keep going. Because if a lot of the time the other party just relies on you to give up or to slip up, and and that's all it takes. Because when you're, if it's one man against 20 guys in suits, there's, all it takes is for one small thing, and you're kind of
got a good story for you on that you're going to like. So I echo your sentiment. Like, I went through employment courts have got like an online video course. I went through all of it. I read all of their guidance. I worked with ChatGPT to help me understand it because I didn't understand it. Like, I structured everything. Right. And there's this one part in the process where either side had to submit these documents to the court, and it had to be done by midnight on this certain date. So I got everything ready and I was about to hit send, and I was like, maybe I should just leave it until right on the time. Because then if they don't reply with any of their documents, the court only gets my documents, and like, they might have forgotten, they probably don't care. So I waited and I waited and I waited, and I was ready like 2 weeks early. So on the day that it was meant to be sent, it got to like 11 o'clock at night, and I was I was like, I don't want to miss this deadline. I better just put it in an hour early. It's 11 o'clock at night. So I sent it. 5 minutes later, the other side sent theirs. And I was like, you cheeky monkeys, you were waiting, hoping I was going to slip up because you understand this stuff. And you knew that you would do it at the very last minute, hope I forgot to do it. So I'm sure there's a whole bunch of legal stuff that lawyers probably don't talk about all that much, which is their sneaky playbook on like letting people mess up on process.
Of course. I mean, it's the same with any process. People are going to find ways to stretch it and bend it to suit their requirements, and it will be working within the absolute limits of that system in order to game it as best as they can. That's been the way of the world for many millennia. That's not going to change anytime soon, is it? Like, let's face it.
It's also pretty brutal.
It is brutal, yeah.
I learned one of my shareholders reminded me that possession is 9/10 of the law. So in court, you have to basically submit everything in advance. And I wanted to use a bunch of my work emails and my like diary from my work, which confirmed meetings had taken place and had written context of what had taken. They just didn't give me them. Like, I was locked out of my old work account, didn't have access to it anymore, requested it. I just didn't get given it. I was like, what are you going to do? And they sent me a bunch of stuff, but it wasn't what I'd asked for. You know, they were like, oh, we've sent you everything we have. And it was definitely not everything they had. So it's tricky.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I'm glad to hear you got the result that you desired as at the end of it. But I appreciate you being able to share that with us. I think it's an interesting
when you say
case.
got what I desired, I'll tell you another bit of the story, Greg, that's going to make me cry. I don't like thinking about it. I'm trying to put it into the past. So we're in court, and one of the documents that I'd requested was about my employment remuneration, which was partly agreed by email. And I didn't get given it until the disclosure, when the other side had to send over all their documents to the court. Then I got it. So I found the email I was looking for, and basically it said that within 6 months of my employment, I'd get given these shares, incentive shares, as being part of the senior management team. So I basically said to the judge, like, I also want the shares. Like, I'm due these shares as part of my employment contract. Now, the first mess up was the judge was like, well, you should have included it in your original paperwork. And I was like, I couldn't include it in my original paperwork because I didn't know about it until disclosure. And when I knew about it, I added it in. And I should have filed this separate form, like an amendment form, which I didn't know about, to include it. So the judge basically said, we're not going to include those shares in this proceedings, but depending on the outcome, you can have a separate court case about those shares. And the shares at the company's valuation at the time of the court proceeding is £1 million worth of shares, a little bit more. So it's like a not insignificant sum of money. So first of all, I was like, would have been nice to know that I could have done the right paperwork to include it in this court proceeding. But if I win this one, I can still claim it in a separate court battle. So I get to interview the CEO. And I got fired, like my last day of work was 31st of December. So I said to him, like, these shares, if I was still part of the senior management team, would I have got the shares? And he was like, on oath. So he's like, yes, you would have got the shares. So I said, okay, did other members of the senior management team get issued the shares after I left? Yes, they did. When did they get issued the shares? 7th of January, 1 week after I was fired. All the other senior managers got issued £1 million worth of shares. Actually, I don't know if that's true. I don't know what shares they got issued, but I would have got issued £1 million of shares under my contract. So I was like, blooming heck, if I win. So my court case had different parts. One was unpaid remuneration. The other was unfair dismissal. So I was like, if I win this court case, I've like got them by the hook. I can get the £1 million worth of shares. So when they'd taken me through the unemployment process, it was all political, to do with my earnout and the fact that they didn't like that I wasn't just taking their low offer. And they took me through the process by the book, because they're very good at doing everything completely correctly. And there was this stage after I was fired where I could appeal. And the people that ran the appeals process were the same people that had fired me. So I thought, I was very emotional. I was very upset about being fired from the company I'd founded, especially when we performed so well. So I was like, I'm not going to do this appeals process. Like, I don't need my nose rubbed in it. So it comes to the decision by the judge, and the judge is like, I can see that you were fired for political reasons. I can see that you were a top performer at your job. I can see that you were due these shares. However, you didn't appeal. And if you'd appealed, you would have unfair dismissal because they should have had separate people running the appeals process, not the people that fired you. And if you'd have done that, I would have won. And I would have won circa an extra £180,000 of compensation and the right to take them back to court for the £1 million. So it was a very expensive lesson. So when you say, oh, Sam, you're happy and you got what you wanted, I'm like, I got some money and I got to feel like I won, but I didn't necessarily get everything I wanted.
Right. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's an interesting lesson, isn't it? It goes to show that.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
I mean, really, emotion is it's a complex thing in these situations, and everyone has every right to feel all the emotions that they feel. But in that moment, making that emotional decision as opposed to looking at it as, okay, well, I've got to do this by the book. I've got to go through the processes. I mean, also whether you knew that or not as well is another thing as well. But it's like,
if I'd known it, I would have done it. I did. If I knew it was going to,
I mean,
of course I would have done it.
And all that. But still, I mean, it's hard, isn't it, to look at these things without in that moment. I can imagine without that high level of emotion and just thinking, well, screw you guys. What is the upside of me putting myself through that to be humiliated potentially by the very people? Like, I totally get the decision, but and it'd be very difficult for anyone, I think, to have done differently than you in that situation. So
should have done it, but hey ho.
Should have done it, but I mean, look, like I said, I don't think anyone else would have been able to do any better. To be honest, like, I know I wouldn't have, so wouldn't beat yourself up about it too much. Like, that's
it's also
I'm
great
pretty,
to learn.
I'm pretty certain I would have made the same emotional decision at that moment. So,
the big learning is about that law is a computer says no situation. It's like the judge could see that it was all BS and that I'd been totally and royally screwed over. But the law says X, Y, Z, and if you don't do it exactly by the book, then computer says no. So that in itself is a very valuable lesson and one I want to always remember. And I'm fairly early in my entrepreneurial career. Very glad to learn these legal lessons now, not, in 10 years' time when selling a much bigger business and getting, wheedled out of much larger sums. It was expensive as a lesson, but still a good one to learn.
Yeah, for sure. And and I know you said that's maybe something that you would have done a bit differently on that particular issue of the disputes scenario. But is there anything else now, looking back over the years, maybe even in the run up to the acquisition or anything, that you sort of think to yourself, okay, if I have another run at that, I know what I would do differently?
Yeah. The easiest one, which I tell my friends that are entrepreneurs, is when you are the founder, majority shareholder of a business, and you're doing years and years and years of exceptionally hard work, you just think of your work email as your email. That's like, I put personal stuff on my work email. It's just my one email address. And I had a separate personal email, but 99% of stuff went through my work email. All of the sale negotiations, which were actually not anything to do with CEO Sam, but were Sam as a shareholder or Sam as an employee, all of that was done through my work email. Big mistake. Anything that is to do with you being an employee or you being a shareholder, separate from the legal entity of the business or your position in the legal entity of the business, do it in your personal email. Like, all of that should be in personal email. I mean, really, even to the extent of if you have appraisals with your manager in your company, you should have it on your personal email, not to your work email. The diary invite should be to your personal email. Any notes should be to your personal email. Because if you ever go to court or have a dispute or a fallout, you won't have access to your work email, and unless they're a very nice company, they will make it very difficult for you to get access to it. So running more things through personal email, massive one. I also think that never give up anything, never give up any leverage without something in return. It's kind of a skeptical thing to say, but I think in business it's just completely true. Like for example, after I sold the company, I'm still in the earnout, which basically means that the buyer hasn't really bought the company yet because they haven't paid for it. And the payment depends on how well it performs in the next year. And as part of that, they couldn't fire me for a year, and I was just still running the company for a year. The only thing that mattered was the revenue growth. Now, being naive and I plan to stay in the larger company, see it through to IPO, experience another exit, like stay there for the long term. So I was really thinking with my friendly long-term be in this business for another 10 years hat. What that meant, for example, was the 100-day plan of like integrating my business into the larger business. I chucked a ton of time and resource in. So like handed over all of the passwords, all of the IP, did a ton of work which didn't drive any revenue, but helped them like hand over systems and did a ton of training for the wider team, which didn't make me any money or drive any revenue. Totally naive. I should have just been like, hey guys, you're not getting access to a single thing until the deal is fully done. And I'm spending the next year just crushing it on work. And they were very good at letting me do that and trying to manipulate me into it. And they really tried to push me harder. And halfway through the year, I kind of realized that, hang on a minute, our incentives are not aligned here at all. Like actually what you want and what I want are totally different. So what would the advice there be? Be very, very, very clear on what you're working on. I mean, one of the things that I've done since selling this business is I've started to work with a coach, and I have an hour a week with her, and it is fantastic at just helping me reflect on what my priorities are. And it seems so simple, and often in retrospect, it's like, why didn't I prioritize that? I just didn't think about it. So definitely working with a coach has really helped me on prioritization.
So you were kind of working towards a larger goal that was loosely given of trying to secure your future with this company after the exit, and as opposed to that here and now kind of the more tangible thing that was more solid. It was written in stone kind of thing.
I should have just said nothing other than revenue growth matters for the next 12 months.
Right.
I actually caught up with one of my mentors about halfway through, and I was saying to him, look, I have a bunch of work I can do that's going to make this product way better, but it's not going to generate any sales for like 6 months because it's going to take 6 months to do the development work, to build this new product. Or I can stop turning up for these product meetings and focus on sales. And he was like, Sam, what are you talking about? The only thing that matters is your sales numbers. That's how you're remunerated, but it's also how your performance is going to be judged. If you build a product that in 3 years makes 50 million, they're not going to care because he probably knew I was going to get fired, but like, they're not going to care because they're going to think you failed in the first year where your main goal was driving revenue. And that was where my mindset shifted halfway through the year. I was like, what on earth? Why am I going to all these meetings to make the core IP better? Totally made sense as a shareholder of the larger business and getting it ready for like another 5 years of growth. But that wasn't aligned with my incentivization.
Well, and you're the founder of the business. So, originally. So, I mean, I suppose it's quite difficult to change that way of thinking when that's the way you've been thinking since day one,
years.
right? You're constantly thinking of, okay, how can we improve our value proposition? How can we, constantly, just future-proof or, come up with the next big thing. So it must be very difficult to get out of that mindset. Yeah.
But it's interesting because actually that earnout mindset is exactly what I'm applying to the new business, because in the earnout, the only thing that mattered was revenue growth. And actually it's blindingly obvious, but in a new company, the only thing that matters is revenue growth, because generating revenue solves all your other problems. You can hire more team members, you can do better branding and marketing, but if you don't have revenue, nothing else matters. So that laser-like focus on like, where's the next customer coming from? Yes, you do need a strategic view to have some big picture thinking, but the big picture thinking still needs to be paid for. So you have to do the small parts really well and make
Right.
money. Yeah.
And I suppose even to go even further on that argument as well, I mean, that's also what you would pay other people to concentrate on too, right? That's what your CTO is for, your product managers and leaders and so on. So yeah, I mean, I suppose either way, it's just if you say hyper focused on that main goal, everyone else is able to fulfill theirs, but without that, they can't, right? And they don't have the resources or the toys to accomplish that, or at least there's not as many.
And I think driving the whole team, because startups are small teams, behind the main goal actually helps everyone be better at their roles as well.
Right.
Like the CTO isn't building some testing that isn't actually needed. The product manager isn't building a feature that no one actually wants. You have to be so focused on, did the customer actually say they wanted this? And it's good for the sales team. So recently we had a customer that was going to go live, contract signed, start date's been pushed back because they were doing some internal work, meant to go live. And then they were like, oh, we actually want this feature and this feature. And previously I would have been like, oh my God, we need to build these features so we can get this contract live. Now I just phoned them up and very politely, I was like, those features are not going to happen. We can go live without them. We've already got the contract signed. Tell me why you want these features. And ultimately, they were worried about reporting. And I was like, look, every day for the first week, I'll call you and report the numbers. Then we'll move it to weekly. Then we'll move it to bi-weekly, because we could just manually do a solution that would save thousands of pounds of development and push back the project by quarter of a year. So having that pushback around your goal for customers as a sales team, like a more junior salesperson would have been on to the CTO being like, I need you to build this so I can close the deal. Whereas actually the work is to go back to the customer and be like, you're not getting that. Like, you need to just get on with paying for what you've got and understanding what is your fear? What are you worried about? How can I solve that fear for you?
And sometimes you're just they're not the right fit, or you're not the right fit for them. And that's okay. I mean,
100%.
I've had a couple of clients over the years, and even one I've got recently as a fractional CCO, which I do every now and then, where there's this constant obsession with founders to people please, to customer please with features. Oh, we need to do this. I'll add exactly what you've described, and the amount of times I just explained, the product is fine as it is. You need to just keep selling it, like and sometimes that means selling it again and again to the same prospect, and reminding them why they fell in love with it in the first place, and exactly what you said, that it's just, you can't keep chasing every suggestion isn't a good suggestion from a customer too. Like, some of them are terrible. Like, customers, they're not in the business of building software. They don't understand how it works. They might say they want this particular button here to do this, and it's like, no, you don't want that. That would be stupid. They don't always know what they or understand what it is that they're asking for, a lot of the time. And you also got to think about the impact that's going to have on the rest of your customer base too, by potentially implementing one thing that might be valuable to one person, but not for others.
Opportunity cost. Yeah.
Right, exactly. There's just it's very easy to start getting pulled into that.
I'm curious, with your experience, what's some good objection handling or some examples you've done of being able to talk that around or close it off?
It's dead simple. It's always dead simple. It's to ask why. That's all it is. So it's like, we need to have this and this, and we need it to do that. Why? Oh, well, and then you start getting into it. And then you just keep asking why until you get right down to the base of it. And then they could usually come to the realization, oh, actually, yeah, now that we've pulled it apart, it's actually not bad.
How often do you see this feature barrier as, actually, we just don't really need the product? Like, I'm curious, how often is it you need to get to the why and close the sale versus it was a fake barrier and they were never going to buy and they were just kind of because also customers are often not very good at saying no to salespeople and just saying, no, we don't want to buy this. Particularly in larger companies, I think a lot of employees are super flattered for the attention. Oh, you want to book in a call with me to discuss my work? Amazing. But they're never going to buy what you're selling.
I think it depends. That varies massively across my experience and what I've observed, either as someone selling directly or indirectly in coaching and assisting other startups and their teams. I think it massively depends on who the types of industries you're selling to. Like if you're selling in, it varies wildly, and you can get a lot of that. You can get a lot of that almost semi-time wasting sales activity to a degree, of people maybe just shopping around and not really wanting to say directly no. But then when you start to get to larger scale solutions, enterprise solutions, and so on, those requests tend to be a lot more driven by the chefs being in the kitchen, everyone wanting to have their piece, and value from that pie. So usually it's buying through committee. You know what it's like. It's groups of executives, all making that decision and all trying to see, okay, how can I make this product help me achieve my goals and my ambitions and my numbers in my department, in my company? How is it going to benefit me? And so it's like, oh well, we need to have this tool in order to do that. And so it's quite often really just about tempering expectations and then going to that why piece. So there usually ends up just not necessarily killing the deal and uncovering, like you say, that kind of that intention never really being there to purchase, but more just an insecurity or an ulterior motive or a misunderstanding of just what the product is and ultimately how it's going to help them, which is usually pretty solvable. But with those other types of businesses, I think that then to me would, if it happens too often, and like you say, just sort of makes it clear that there was never an intention to buy, that means that the discovery process was wrong. And you have to go back and you have to improve that. And you have to really just do a better job at finding that out earlier, and making sure that your buy signals are clearer.
And in your experience with those SME customers, that pre-qualification piece, I'm curious of if there are any tips, tricks, stories, tactics that you use to make that pre-qualification work really well.
I'm sure there are, but I mean, again, it massively depends on the scenario, the product, the industry, everything else. I mean, people who know me quite well for being hesitant to ever give out advice without context. It's one of the things that's kind of a bit of a bugbear of mine. Like that I think that the world of startups is oversaturated with people too keen to give their opinion without being like, but it's for this very specific scenario. But like, I mean, I suppose, yeah, broadly speaking, it's just about just asking more and more questions and being super observant and attentive to the detail, and not being overly keen on selling. Like, which sounds obvious and counterintuitive, and I know I'm being very broad on this because, again, I don't want to be too precise because it wouldn't be appropriate. But I think, yeah, it's less about selling and sales as it is more 90% of sales to me is listening, and so it's just really about not being too keen to always wanting to try and push for the sale, but really just making sure that there is an appropriate fit for the product. I don't know if that's really answering your question. Like, I kind of feel like
I think probably one of the
you see what
issues...
I mean? Like, it's more about just trying not to fit a square peg into a round hole. And the problem is you tend to find that, with a lot of organizations, and I'm sure you will have experienced this numerous times, once you start growing a team, especially, that problem does start to compound in the early stages of team growth, because you start to bring on more junior individuals. Those are very hungry. You've got sales targets, they've got numbers. And so they are starting to then push, and that will change. And you will find that they are quite often bringing on board people into that journey, into that, the early stages of the pipeline that probably shouldn't be there, and that's usually where you start getting those problems. I don't know if that's your experience, but certainly is mine.
I think in early stage companies, often the issue is there isn't product market fit. The product's still being iterated on. Maybe the company's going to pivot, has pivoted. And what it means for sales is, if you don't really understand your ideal customer profile, how do you know who to disqualify? Like, someone may look good, but they're actually way away from who would be good to work with. And the tighter that you can get on what a good customer looks like to you, then you can disqualify all the others. Like, a piece of work that we're doing right now is, well, actually, if they're not on Salesforce, we don't really want to work with them, because CRM integration is so important, and it's costly to integrate with CRMs, and it's hard to train and onboard on different CRMs. If they don't have more than 25,000 website visitors a month, they're too small. Like, there's not really much point in talking to them, because they're not going to get the benefits that come through automation and scale. If they don't sell a product that is like $5,000 plus, then actually they probably don't have the margin and budget to put in AI because it's quite expensive to set up and do it properly. And then when you start to have these pre-qualification questions get neater and neater and neater, and you really know who you can go in and do an amazing job for, you then know who you can't do an amazing job for, or what's outside of scope, or what you can't really support. So, but that's hard. Like, that's part of the startup journey, is figuring out what it is you actually sell. What's your value proposition?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, but it's just about being realistic. Because I mean, what you're saying there are just some very practical boundaries that you can easily sit down and figure out. I think with just give it enough time and really consider it. But then on the other side, there's also like, what are we not? It's not just what are we, and so therefore who should want us, but it's what are we not, and where do we sit in the market in terms of who's better than us? Because if there are some competitors that you might come across, you're just like, we can't compete with them. And my startup's a great example of that. I had that very conversation, and I've had that conversation for the last couple of weeks with my team about, guys, we're going to start selling soon because we're still in stealth, and when we do, we should not be approaching anyone that has X, Y, and Z. We cannot compete. We know that we are not good enough yet for that. And just being really honest about where you are as a product, and saying these are our shortcomings. And so that way, I think, to answer your question more directly, in terms of kind of, the pre-qualification bit, it's like, okay, find out what they need. And if they're saying we need this and we need that, and you don't have it, there's no, just like, okay, we're not for you. This isn't the solution that's going to do that. And based on the level of which you talked about that, and my understanding of how important that is to you, I'm not going to convince you to come over to us. We're not there. There are better alternatives for what you need. And if you don't know what they are, I can tell them to you, and I would highly recommend them. And that to me is what should be done. But of course, I think that takes a lot of experience to get to a point to even be able to do that. And the balls to do it as well. It requires you to leave the hubris at the door, to be honest about what your product doesn't do, just as much as be very very much an ambassador for what it does do. It's difficult to do,
Completely agree with that.
Yeah.
But
look, we should probably end part one of this conversation. And it's been hugely interesting, and I really, really appreciate your candor on everything we're just talking about. But we will carry on talking about the sales stuff in a moment. But for us, but for those listening and watching, you're going to have to wait a few days, I'm afraid. So that's the end of part one. So thanks so much for joining me, and thanks everyone for listening and watching. But we'll see you in part two in a few days.
Thank you for listening and or watching. Please like and subscribe. Or if you are listening via podcasting service and want to show your support, consider rating or leaving a review. It really helps. See you next week.